I'm not saying you can't do space opera with noir. It's the kind of space opera where the hero always wins and, does it with a tip of the hat and a dashing smile and always gets the girl at the end. It's me. Let's get into the second half of the book.
Yeah, we're doing part 2 of Leviathan Wakes, the James S.A. Corey 2011 novel that launched 1 million sub-intellectual properties. At least 8 more books, a beloved TV series, apparently a bunch of spin-off books, and a role-playing game. There is an Expanse role-playing game.
It started as a role-playing game.
It did. I have more questions. I have more trivia about that today. We're going even further back in the Wayback Machine.
I actually am as much excited about the trivia that I came up with as I am talking about the book. And I have both a trivia question for you and a bonus extra credit. You can only get a ding, you can't get a buzz. Ooh. Trivia question as well.
Oh, that's great. I also have a little redirect for later, so this should be fun.
Cool.
But so last time we left off, our heroes Miller and Holden were basically trying to make their way through Arrow Station, where a giant alien biological weapon has been unleashed upon the population by a bunch of ne'er-do-well scientists from a company that we think is called Protogen. We've bumped into Protogen as a security detail, but apparently they are some sort of large multinational is the wrong term in this setting. But everybody in Arrow Station is turning into a vomit zombie, basically headed in the direction of what happened to Julie Mao.
Yeah.
They think that Naomi is probably waiting with the Rocinante. Holden gave her kind of a time limit, and at first we thought that they had departed, but really Holden and Miller have no other choice but to just go and see.
We might as well go. It might still be
right.
there.
They're either going to die of radiation poisoning or get turned into vomit zombies, so you might as well go. They manage to dodge the vomit zombies. There's a lot of action as they try to dodge the security forces. They make it to the docks. Naomi, of course, has been waiting for Holden.
And Holden and Miller are basically hooked up to the ship's sort of sick bay, AI-powered sick bay that can treat anything. It's a very role-playing game dynamic because 2 days later they're more or less fine. Although we do learn that they're gonna have to take cancer tests once a month for the rest of their lives, which is unfortunate. But basically they make it and they are healed. I should say that Holden then confesses his love for Naomi, and she sort of rebuffs him. Not entirely rebuffs him, but basically says, "I'm not really sure if you love me or if you just want to sleep with me." And he's a little bit rebuffed. Then they do some research and they find records that reveal that Protogen discovered the protomolecule. I guess they find the ship that Julie Mao had used to escape the pirate ship, and they find some records, and they get this incredibly expositional communique from a scientist that kind of gives the whole backstory of what we were calling the Phoebe bug, or now calling the protomolecule. What we learn is that we think that an ancient billions of year old space civilization actually unleashed this on the solar system as a biological weapon to destroy all life on Earth 2 billion years ago. However, it was captured in the rings of Saturn rather than making it in Earth. Protogen has discovered it. They've been studying it for the last couple of years, and they're really impressed by it. They realize it's a bioweapon. It does horrible things, and they decide to unleash it on Eros as just kind of like an experiment to see what will happen if they unleash it in a populated area, and it infects millions of people, which is what it's designed to do. So that's horrific. Then Miller is able, through his connection with Havelock, to discover Protogen's black site, where the scientists are studying the horrific thing that they've unleashed. And they go back to Tycho and they report to Fred Johnson, the butcher, but he's
The
the butcher
butcher
of
of
what?
Anderson Station.
The butcher of Anderson Station, and they convince him to organize an assault on the Protogen Black Site. Miller and Holden participate in the assault. There's some daring do, there's some action. It's a close thing, but they win, and they capture a scientist named Dresden, who is a real POS.
Yep.
He is a sort of sociopathic corporate scientist. He tells a little bit about the origins of the bug, and he basically said we had to figure out what this thing was for the sake of humanity's survival. So we really had to unleash it on everybody in Eros because we really needed to know what it was going to do. And so I know it's bad, but like, we shouldn't waste the learning of all these people who died. And he's kind of starting to sway everybody. And Miller just pulls out his gun and shoots him dead. Because, I mean, this man, you know, is responsible for millions of deaths and doesn't seem to care about it at all. And Miller is worried that his connections are going to allow him to get away with it, essentially. And he just decides he's not going to let that happen.
Yeah, he kind of sees Dresden beginning to convince Johnson and Holden, and Miller, in just like this sort of great moment of grabbing the narrative by the horns, just goes ahead and kills Dresden, which then kicks off a bunch of the other plot elements of the final third of the book. Holden is like, get your own ride back to Tycho. Holden is outraged. It's basically a chance for Holden's and Miller's worldviews to collide. Holden as the idealist and Miller as the nihilist.
It also creates relationship drama because these are our two protagonists, and for a while they were getting along splendidly, and they saved each other's lives, and now they are at odds. And both of them are unhappy about it. You know, they sort of like each other, but they do have different worldviews and philosophies, and we're seeing them in conflict.
Yeah, Miller tries to make it up to Holden a few times, but Holden very clearly says, like, there's no way that I can trust you, so I can't trust you with my crew. And they really aren't able to kind of like bring it back together there. But Miller comes up with an idea to destroy Eros. They're going to steal the Mormon generation ship, the Nauvoo, that has been being built in the background. We get a lot of looks at the Nauvoo over the last 100, 200 pages or so.
Yeah, it's enormous.
It's enormous. It's 2 kilometers long. It's a very big ship. So they're going to load it. They aren't going to load the Nauvoo with nukes, but they are going to ram the Nauvoo into Aero Station while a bunch of nukes are set off simultaneously on the surface. They get a bunch of belters to help with that part. They all head for Aero Station. And at the moment when... so Miller doesn't go back. He is basically going to stay on Eros and die in a true blaze of glory. But at the very last second, Eros just jumps itself 200 kilometers out of the path of the Nauvoo, generally circumventing the laws of physics as we know them, which really spooks the crew of the Rocinante. And they begin to chase. And then, not long after that, Eros begins to move. And it is headed down the gravity well towards Earth. Everybody is suddenly like, oh my gosh, a giant asteroid is headed for Earth loaded with a bioweapon. The asteroid impact alone would be extinction event, but the prospect of that extinction level event being followed with the entire human civilization being turned into vomit zombies gets the solar system to kind of work together, and they hatch a plan where they're going to launch all of Earth's nuclear weapons at Eros.
Right. And I think one thing we should say earlier, the whole point of this launching Eros into the sun plan, part of it is the idea that if this biological weapon, the protomolecule, gets, if it gets on Earth or Mars, essentially the entire human population on those planets are going to be killed and also turned into these sort of horrific flesh pot zombies. But also they're trying to keep anybody else from getting it and using it as a biological weapon. And that's why they were going to nuke the station too. They were going to make it so radioactive and so hot that nobody would be able to, to land on Eros and stop it from going into the sun or getting a sample. So Holden and Rocinante are chasing Eros as it accelerates increasingly fast. Miller is inside, And he thinks first he has an idea that he's going to push the nukes to sort of the center of its consciousness. If he can find Julie Mao, maybe he can kind of blow up her and everything else, and this intelligence that has kind of it's like a hive mind has formed on Eros. That it will.
It's an artificial intelligence. It's basically a large.
It's an artificial intelligence.
Language model.
It's a large language model, and it's also something like the drummers from the Diamond Age.
Yeah.
And it's a hive mind, and but he also then decides, no, if I can find Julie's consciousness, I'll try to convince her to stop doing what she's doing, which is sort of driving impossibly this, like magically, this rock at the Earth. And he basically convinces Fred Johnson and Holden to go along with this plan. They temporarily divert the nukes. Miller realizes that Julie is the center of consciousness, that Julie Mao is probably controlling the consciousness of this intelligence. There are millions of intelligences, but hers is the primary one. And after kind of poking around for a bit and getting radioactively sick again, he finds her, and he is able to contact and talk with her, and he is able to convince her to divert from Earth and in fact drive the rock into Venus. And so Holden and the rest of the solar system watch this in stunned relief. The Earth is saved, but we don't really know what's going to happen to the protomolecule on Venus. We also don't know if Miller survives or not. I don't think we see, the last thing we see, he's kind of like, Slim Pickens at the end of Dr. Strangelove, like riding the bomb into Venus. But, they might have a gentle landing, and Julie might find a way to preserve his life. He was also starting to become infected by the protomolecule, too, and we don't know if that's going to continue.
We also know that the way that Holden bargains for this to happen, to convince Earth to divert the nukes and all of that, is that he gives the last sample of the protomolecule to Fred Johnson. We get an epilogue where Johnson briefly considers doing the right idealistic thing, and there's a great line where he says, like, it would have been a very noble failure. And the book ends on the same phrase about giving humanity the stars that Dr. Dresden had said.
Setting up Johnson to become maybe more of an anti-hero in the future, perhaps.
Correct. So, by this point, we've talked a lot about first halves of books and second halves of books. Are books too plot heavy? Are they too theme heavy? As I was kind of thinking about this, one thing that I hear a lot from the people I work with is very often they will say, I really felt it in my legs, but I didn't really feel it in my lungs. Or like I was breathing really hard, but I didn't really feel it in my legs. Sort of a disconnect between the driving forces of our cardiovascular and muscular systems. And I was kind of wondering, for you, are you experiencing a similar disconnect that we've experienced with like the second half of The Long Goodbye or some of Neil Stephenson, all of Red Harvest? Where is this novel landing for you on that seesaw of plot and theme? Is the thing that I threw in there. I wasn't sure if it's plot versus idea or plot versus theme. I don't know, somebody at us, but I think you get what I'm saying. And where is this landing for you?
I found the second half of the book to be a perfectly entertaining, thrilling, but ultimately sort of disappointing read until Miller realizes what's happening with Julie's consciousness and connects with her. And that part I really, really liked. But I felt like the second half of the book was driven by the necessities and exigencies of, is that the right word, of plot?
Yeah.
More than anything else. There were some nice moments. I think the romance between Holden and Naomi felt sort of nicely written. There's some funny set pieces. There's a kind of funny moment where Miller doesn't realize that Fred Johnson is a military general and kind of lectures him about how hard it is to land an invasion force on an asteroid, which is, it's just like, it would be like lecturing Beethoven about how hard it is to write a symphony, sort of hilarious moment of irony. But I mostly felt like we were just in kind of an adventure yarn, and I felt like the efforts to kind of maintain the themes, to me, they felt just a little thin. I think Holden's objecting to Miller's shooting of Dresden is the most interesting thing of the second half of the book. I think that's the most interesting idea that develops, but it's kind of underdeveloped, and it's also kind of cast aside by Naomi. Naomi is just sort of like, he's right. That was the right thing to do. And Holden's like, yeah, I'm not sure. And she's like, yeah, he's right. And, you're sleeping with me now, so you should probably agree. And Holden's like, okay, board, fine. Dude. Get on board, dude. And I guess I also feel like the setup was such that it was actually pretty clear that Miller was right. And I think you probably could have made that more ambiguous in an interesting way. I think what was actually, it was more of a kind of, the drama between Holden and Miller was interesting. It really, though, to me, that felt like Holden needed to grow to kind of understand how his idea of justice might need to expand in a contingency where there is no accountability for very powerful people, right? Like how, if you're sort of like, no, we're not gonna kill that man without a trial, he deserves a trial. But if there's no power in the solar system that can bring that man to trial, then what do you do? And to me, that feels like a pretty basic idea. So, and in fact, I don't know, actually, my second question is about this too. I really like, both for just the sake of the authors, Ty Frank and Dan Abraham. Do I have that?
Yep.
Daniel Abraham. I love that this book started as a role-playing game. And I believe it was Ty Frank who designed the game, and it was Dan Abraham who pitched the idea of a book, and then they became more collaborative. I love that. I also really felt like the second half of the book felt like a plot designed by a dungeon master. I haven't been playing Dungeons and Dragons recently for very long. I played as a kid, and we've been playing again. So my experience, I actually wanted to ask you about this, but what I felt like what we got was a series of pretty self-contained adventures where this band of adventurers who, through kind of a really bizarre coincidence, got like a perfect sort of base ship. The Rocinante is like perfect for a band of D&D adventurers. It's not too powerful, but it's powerful enough. And then they have kind of like the patron, Fred Johnson, who sends them on the adventure, who can sort of, through means we don't fully understand, something about a council, something about negotiations with us, always negotiate the exact resources they need in addition to the ship to complete whatever the next level mission is. And it felt like a series of scenarios that would be really, really fun to play in a role-playing game, but just a little bit, maybe, I don't know, implausible or predictable, or just maybe something where the plot just drives everything in a way that things like theme, things like tone, things like character development become sort of secondary. And as such, while it's still fun to read, it, to me, sort of slipped from greatness until kind of like the very end, where it kind of clawed back some greatness in the relationship between Miller and Julie. But that was a very, very long answer. Do you agree with that? What would you asterisk? What would you add?
No, I think that's right. And like, I think I would sort of pose my counter argument in the next question about character arcs. But what was, I think the last thing you just described about the other literary devices becoming not just secondary, but fully driven by the plot. Like we
Yeah.
don't get conflict or character development or anything like that that isn't plot dependent.
Yeah.
And versus if you go to a different genre, you might find things where devices like theme and character and conflict drive plot. And,
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what's happening here in the second half of this book. And it's understandable. And I think the way that I am kind of like coming to terms with it deals with the character arcs of the characters. But first, do you have a question about the adventure part of it?
Yeah, well, I think we're all driving at the same question, which is, I recently was reading some of Hemingway's, um, not A Farewell to Arms. Was it A Farewell to Arms? Or it's the one set in the Spanish Civil War.
For Whom the Bell Tolls?
No, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Yeah. And that is a book that relates a series of daring do adventures in military fashion that makes it very clear that while there's a certain nobility to the life those characters are living, that it's not fun. It's not adventurous. I can also think probably the best example of this of everything we have read is probably the Forever War, where like, would you want to be Mandela? Like,
No.
I don't think so. No. And these guys kind of feel like they're having fun,
Yeah.
right? They're on the Rocinante. They've got some good weapon systems. They've got some good allies. They're going to go out and blow up some psychopathic bad guys, and they're going to feel good about it. And then they're going to have sex afterwards and drink some tequila. And it just feels like a lark. And I guess my question for you is, I don't think there's anything wrong with adventurous space opera. I love Star Wars. But I also really, really admired the parts early in the book, especially with Miller, but Holden gets some of this too, but really with where Miller is starting to recognize that he's starting to enjoy killing and being horrified about it. And also that passage I read last time about, the body being spiked to the wall and how the cops were sort of jaded about that and how it was just seen as sort of a natural consequence and how that kind of jadedness creeps into this world and the psychology of living in the belt where, yes, justice is important, but if you mess with somebody's water supply or air supply, you're probably just going to get spaced or nailed to the wall. And we don't really have time for courts and things like that and how that can mess with your mind. I thought all those ideas were really, really fascinating. Then I'd say the middle third of this book is really daring do. And so I guess my question for you is, do you think those two things can coexist? Can you have fantastic adventure and kind of gritty, character-driven noir that is about the effects of violence and danger on the soul and the psyche?
Yeah, I think you can, because I think that you just described Chinatown.
Ah,
Like it is like Chinatown is so dirty. Like it feels grimy, but it also it doesn't feel real, but it does feel like reality has been turned up quite a bit. And the stuff that's getting turned up is the sort of tawdry aspects of human nature, of just how self-centered we can be and the outcomes of that. But Chinatown's a great yarn. Like and it's, and similar to this story, like the big prevailing thing that's sort of standing behind Chinatown is like water rights, and like here it's maybe like ice rights or air rights or something like that. And I totally agree with you that we sort of end up in this slightly glitzier place for large passages of this book. And the parts about it that made me want to bring it to us to like discuss in the first place really are the aspects of the noirish aspects of it, the dirty aspects of it. In the show, oh my gosh, I can't remember. The OPA leader, Anderson Dawes, on Series Station, is played by Jared Harris, of Mad Men and Chernobyl, and just a fantastic actor.
red-haired British actor.
And there's this moment where you're
Yep.
like, what in the world is Jared Harris doing here? Especially
Yeah.
in the early days of the show, which is on the Sci-Fi
Yeah.
Channel, and, perfectly good channel, but not, you know, the same kind of level as something that's producing Mad Men or Chernobyl. And
Right.
he is such an incredible influence on the show and the cast. He really takes the whole show and elevates it because he is that kind of gritty, realistic fixer. And watching him do it, you're like, okay, I really feel this world right now. But yeah, like a lot of this second half of the book is like torpedoes and space dog fights or the threat of those things. And the space sections are so sort of sanitized and clean. The Rocinante keeps getting described as Amos is like, there's not going to be anything for me to work on here. Those Martians, like everything's beautiful. And there's a coffee maker and things are very ungritty. So I think it can be done. And I think this book does it in places, but I wish that they had sort of turned down some of the page turner aspects of it and gotten into more of the stuff that you and I dig, which is like, okay, like the gritty nature of the life in the belt, which I think is just so interesting. Like there are these people that have been living there for centuries. They haven't evolved, but they've adapted. And there is this really interesting social dynamic between the Belters and the inner planets that I find just really well drawn and really interesting. But yeah, the like hardcore space opera parts, yeah.
Well, and I guess what my question was, can they coexist? And you're saying yes, they can, which would then draw the conclusion that the coexistence is not particularly artfully done in this book. And that might be. And I don't know if that's a question of tone or if that's just a question of volume, like there's just a sort of too much adventure. Or I do think part of it is, the Rocinante not only I don't think anybody once we lost the medic, I was just like, I don't think anybody else is going to die. I feel pretty confident about that. I start feeling the plot armor, right? And, like, their mentor is George R.R. Martin, and you do not feel the plot armor, especially in the first few books. Nope. And I think also that dogfight where they take the station, it's nail biting, right? Because they almost get blown up, but they make it, but they're basically unscathed. It's like they write it in such a way that you're like, wow, that was a close one, but they're completely fine and nobody's wounded and they're all completely fine. And they're just going to go back. It is like the end of a D&D adventure where everybody's down to like 2 hit points and then you're just going to get a long rest. And then it's like, it never happened.
Yeah.
And
the ship is beat up. But like that's what ships are there for in D&D is to absorb the money and the hit points of the players.
Exactly, yeah, and that the fights. It did really feel like there were multiple occasions in this book where the characters' hit points were draining, and hit points. I understand, for those of you who don't play D&D, this is the way you keep track of your character's health. It's a very crude but workable system that allows you to swing swords and cast spells at people and kind of keep track of what happens. It doesn't really resemble how the human anatomy works, essentially, if your hit points go down to 0, you're unconscious. It's sort of, and you're at risk of bleeding to death. But if you recover from that, the next day you're totally fine. And, there's actually a lot that can happen to you short of dying, but also short of being totally fine. I mean, we get a little bit of that with their radiation exposure and stuff like that, but it does start knocking on the plausibility door for me too. And it just started to feel like, I feel like we're in Star Wars, and when I'm in Star Wars, I don't feel like I can be in Chinatown. I don't feel like I can be in The Long Goodbye. I don't know. To me, they don't really smish together. I think you could have a world. Well, when I say Star Wars, I don't mean space battles and lasers and things, that's fine. I think a world in which all the characters make it and are capable of superhuman feats, that Luke Skywalker, there's a reason that Luke Skywalker and the Christopher Reeve Superman movies came out around the same time, and that the same composer did the soundtracks. That they're really, that Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are kind of like comic superheroes, even though they're sort of technically humans. I mean, they can fly, they can jump, they have magical laser swords, and even, the lasers in the spaceships have this kind of supernatural quality to it. So it does, I don't know, it feels like a level of superhero action adventure that to me just doesn't work with the horror of war in the same way. But again, I'm not saying you can't do space opera with noir. It's the kind of space opera where the hero always wins and, does it with a tip of the hat and a dashing smile and always gets the girl at the end.
And that's,
it's me,
and that's,
like,
and that's what it, and that's, and I think that's, I'm feeling that same incongruity here. That the space...
I cleaned it up for you, kid. Now blow this pop stand and let's get out of here.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeehaw!
Right, totally. That, like, and there's moments of it in the Star Wars universe where things do get gritty, but really it's only in Rogue One where they're afforded the ability to kill all of the main characters because they have to.
Yeah, you've made this point before.
Yeah. But so I've got a question about character arcs. So
sure.
The first line of the book is something like, after 9 days, Julie Mao was ready to die.
Yeah.
So keeping that sentence in your brain and then thinking about where Holden starts and Miller and Holden's kind of character arcs, does that change for you your experience of the book? Thinking that this is a book where Julie Mao is getting ready to die. And then what that means for the other characters and the way that they interact with mortality.
After 9 days... No, but I might be missing something because, I mean, the first sentence of a book is always very important or should be very important. But I also, in this case, think it's very situational. Like, we know that Julie Mao has a destiny, and that sort of points to it. But also, until we're about halfway through the book, the reader could just as easily expect Julie Mao to survive unscathed. And actually, at the end of the book, there's even the possibility that Julie Mao could survive unscathed. I don't know what's going to happen in the future books, but whatever the proto-molecule does, I think one of the things it could do is give her body back, right? It's got plenty of stuff to work with. I don't know why it would do that. I don't even know that we know that the proto-molecule is necessarily evil. That's the protogen interpretation of... it's some kind of bioweapon, but it's not like it came with a manual that said, this is a biological weapon designed to destroy life on Earth. So all of that to say, well, let me talk about Miller. I do think, my feeling is that Miller's character arc roughly stops when he finds Julie Mao, and he never really changes after that.
Finds her the first time when she's dead.
When he finds her in the bathroom and she's dead, I don't think his character develops any further after that. I think when he decides to die on the asteroid, he's in the same state of mind as when he found her the first time. And then when he convinces her to turn aside, it is an act of heroism, and it's an act of insight, and it's an act of kind of avuncular or fatherly love that he's developed for her, maybe romantic love too, but I think he's relating to her sort of like a father and a daughter, or an uncle and a niece. And I don't think that changes. I don't think that his... there's this sense of like, oh, is he becoming too familiar with death? Is that why he kills Dresden? No, I don't think so. I think that Naomi's explanation of why he killed Dresden works. I think that's what we were being set up for. I actually think that if Miller was starting to become morally compromised, he kind of actually finds the balance he needs to find. I don't think he becomes insane. I don't think he becomes suicidal. I just think he doesn't have much to live for, and he's decided to live for Julie Mao. So I don't see a lot there. In a way, the sentence you said, after 9 days, Julie Mao is ready to die. I do think that Holden was ready to die for the entire second half of the book. Miller was ready to die for the second half of the book. In terms of Holden, I think Holden's arc is very interesting until about that half of the book as well, because he's assuming responsibility in the mantle of leadership, and we're seeing him sort of change and, being less trusting and being basically like, he's not part of the military. He's the captain of his crew, and they're kind of mercenaries, and he's loyal to them. He kind of evolves in this interesting way. And then I feel like he gets stuck there, too. And I think the conflict between him and Miller, check this out, is driven by Holden's negative capability. I think that it's kind of a false conflict. I think because I don't know, maybe you disagree with me, but I think Holden's being kind of a jackass. Like I think that yes, he probably was right to observe that Miller was killing those guards too easily. But Miller also observed that, and I think he pulled himself from the brink of that. And so the fact that Holden's like, and you killed this psychopath who killed 1.5 million people and was probably gonna get away with it. I'm like, yeah, that one kind of felt justified to me too. So I don't know, maybe I'm just babbling at this point, but I sort of lost the arcs about midway through the book, and I don't really think I got them back. I think that Miller has the better ending of the two.
Well, because he completes the thing his character is supposed to do. He finds the quarry.
Yes.
Like
he does.
He solves.
And it's a classic noir ending because he completes his mission and he finds the missing vulnerable person and he's able to help them a little, but not as much as he had hoped. He can't totally protect them, but he can also protect them a little bit.
And that's sort of why I asked this question, because if you think of it, like the broad strokes of the character arc is that Miller becomes more suicidal and more nihilistic as the book progresses. Like at the beginning of the book, we get the sense that Miller thinks he still has purpose in his life. Yeah. And the events of the book kind of show him and show us that he doesn't, except for this case that he gets kind of obsessed with. Julie also, we learn right from the get-go, is ready to die. And she does. I mean, like, she leaves that storage locker and is infected very soon after. So basically, she fulfills that arc towards death. When we meet Holden, he's kind of given up. He's been working this water hauler job, we know, for 5 years. And from everything we learn about Holden throughout the rest of the book, he's like a pretty well-skilled individual. He could probably go do anything, but he's kind of just like living out his days on this dead-end job.
Apparently doing quite well with the women.
Hooking up with every pretty lady that comes on board except for Naomi. But in the final pages of the book, both Miller and Julie complete their arcs towards death. And Holden kind of moves in the other direction. It's like, and we talked about this before, that we really prefer the Miller chapters to the Holden chapters. And it feels like those two paired arcs of Julie's and Miller's, I find really interesting. And I think like, okay, that's actually kind of interesting that they have like their entire action of the book is moving towards death. And Holden's is sort of moving away from stagnation, which like might not be enough. And so you kind of get the feeling that we've got to like bump up the Holden stuff with Naomi and with Miller and
conflict with Miller and will they, won't they with Naomi.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and they're perfectly serviceable but predictable subplots that are ultimately not amazing. I don't think, ultimately a little bit disappointing. And I do think Holden is a weaker character for that reason, although I do like him at the end of the book. And yeah, but it does feel like Miller's having this like existential adventure,
Right.
and Holden is having this like Dungeons and Dragons adventure.
Yeah, he's like getting off his butt and getting the girl and getting the shiny spaceship and like doing some.
And I mean, which one would you? By the way, Chris Begg, which one would you rather have? For sure,
of course, and like
it is definitely the better adventure to have, but it's also it's the less interesting story,
and it makes you think that like like our whole thing is like working on books like this and sort of tugging at the seams of it, and like where is it upper and where is it middle, and
yep.
From what these guys were probably trying to do, they nailed it. Like Holden, like what you just said is exactly what you want to do with one of your characters in a book like this. You make your readers want to be that character because like then they are so invested in it. And then the Miller chapters turn into really interesting digressions from, boy, I wish we would get back to talking about what my life in space is going to be like. And I think that it's a very successful endeavor. And the reason I kind of brought it here was basically for this. Like, does it work as an upper middlebrow book or is it more middle? And I am not sure.
Yeah. I keep going back and forth. It is, I would say, though, it probably is upper middlebrow in the sense that I believe, sometimes I think you and I find upper middlebrow in something that is incredibly ambitious that doesn't quite live up to its ambition. And sometimes we find upper middlebrow in something that's not very ambitious and sort of transcends its lack of ambition. Yeah. And this is definitely the latter.
Yeah.
And it's designed to be middlebrow entertainment that's got some guts,
Totally.
It's got, and so in that sense, I got to kind of tip my hat and say, yeah, I think it's upper middlebrow, but I don't know, with this one, I kept going in my head, is this a 3 out of 5 stars or a 4 out of 5 stars? And it was like, well, right now it's sort of hovering around 3.6. The first half of the book was hovering around like 3.6, 3.8. Second half of the book's hovering around like 3.2. It's like definitely 3 stars, like definitely good.
Yeah.
But I do, and maybe part of it is sort of the clumsiness that I'm detecting, but I don't know. It's hard for me to fully put my finger on it because I think you're right. The book is actually doing what it is trying to do. Yeah. I'm just maybe less interested in what it's trying to do than what it sometimes reaches for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should probably do one of your questions and then go to trivia.
I'd really like to do the co-reading. I don't have a copy, so why don't you just read the whole thing?
Oh, okay.
I really liked the writing of the sections when there's a moment where Miller figures out that the sounds he's hearing from the proto-molecule are Julie's voice. The first moment for me was when it dodges and it says, "Don't you fucking touch me."
Yeah.
And then there was another moment where you hear the voice say, "You can't catch my razor. You can't catch my razorback.
Yeah.
You can't catch my razor." And I was like, oh, that's Julie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were joking about it being a large language model, but like that's kind of what I love about what the proto-molecule does is that it is generating, basically a large language model.
Yeah, maybe or sort of like a soup of dreams,
That's a great phrase. So he's found her. There's this great line that I'm not going to read where the narration says, "She reminded Miller of a mermaid who had traded her fins for a space station." And I was like, that is right out of Raymond Chandler. Like, it's just the same, like, outlandish analogy that just is really pushing it, but also, like, really works. It's really,
but
really
very,
good.
very visually wonderful, too. Yep.
Okay, so Miller has found Julie and has introduced himself. She is able to talk. She is kind of in a sort of half dream, half waking state. And she has confessed to him that she's dreamed about racing home with the Eros towards Earth or Luna, whichever, but it's going to cause a huge disaster if that happens. His suit alarms shrieked at him when he undid his helmet seals. He turned them off. The air was strange, acetate and cumin, and a deep, powerful musk that made him think of hibernating animals. Julie watched him as he stripped off his gloves. Right then, the protomolecule was latching onto him, burrowing into his skin and eyes, getting ready to do to him what it had done to everyone on Eros. He didn't care. He took the hand terminal back and then laced his fingers through hers. "You're driving this bus, Julie," he said. "Do you know that? I mean, can you tell?" Her fingers were cool in his, but not cold. "I can feel something," she said. "I'm hungry? Not hungry, but I want something. I want to go back to Earth." "We can't do that. I need you to change course," Miller replied. What had Holden said? Give her Venus. Head for Venus instead. "That's not what it wants," she said. "It's what we've got on offer," Miller said. Then, a moment later, "We can't go home. We need to go to Venus." She was quiet for a long moment. "You're a fighter, Julie. You've never let anyone call your shots for you. Don't start now. If we go to Earth, it'll eat them too, the same way it ate me." "Yeah." She looked up at him. "Yeah," he said again, like that. "What happens on Venus?" "We die, maybe? I don't know. But we don't take a lot of people with us, and we make sure no one gets a hold of this crap," he said, gesturing at the grotto around them. "And if we don't die, then, well, that'll be interesting." "I don't think I can." "You can. The thing that's doing all this, you're smarter than it is. You're in control. Take us to Venus." The fireflies swirled around them, the blue light pulsing slightly, bright and dim, bright and dim. Miller saw it in her face when she made the decision. All around them, the lights went bright, the grotto flooding in soft blue, and then dimmed back to where they had been before. Miller felt something catch at the back of his neck, like the first warning of a sore throat. He wondered if he'd have time to deactivate the bomb. And then he looked at Julie. Juliet Andromeda Mao, OPA pilot, heir to the Mao Kwiatkowski corporate throne, the seed crystal of a future beyond anything he'd ever dreamed. He'd have plenty of time. "I'm afraid," she said. "Don't be," he said. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said. "No one ever does. And look, you don't have to do this alone," he said. "I can feel something in the back of my mind. It wants something I don't understand. It's so big." Reflexively, he kissed the back of her hand. There was an ache starting deep in his belly, a sense of illness, a moment's nausea, the first pangs of his transformation into Eros. "Don't worry," he said. "We're going to be fine."
It's great. I love that section.
It's really good. There's the moments of lyrical writing are spaced out. They're there, but it's not whacking you over the head with it.
The best moments of this book are when here is a pattern is when the effects of this galactic murder mystery thriller, eco thriller / disease thriller, Andromeda strain type plot, when the effects of all that are made manifold on the human body and the human soul, right? Like that. And so all the little details about the catch in the back of his throat, and when you're getting a cold for the first time and you're like, oh, it's happening, and that's your cells dying, right? Or becoming inflamed. And it's happening much more quickly, and that sense of dread, but also his awareness that he's okay with that, and then his sort of avuncular assurance to her, and that being that working, right? I buy it. I completely buy it. I completely buy that Miller showing up would be able to convince whatever's left of Julie's consciousness, and apparently it's all of her consciousness, that that the proto-molecule has not devoured her mind. She is more or less intact. Her body is not intact, but her consciousness is intact, and that he would be able to connect with her, and he would be able to convince her to do that thing. It's all earned in that writing, and in a way that is very impressive.
And I think this is what really impressed me, is that it completes the promise of the first sentence of the book. Yeah. And that, I think, that was a moment where I was like, oh, okay, boy, do these guys understand structure. And, and it's one of those where I was like, wow, that's really impressive. That both, like, Miller sort of gets on board with Julie's, it's not that Julie's suicidal, but that she is ready to die for whatever reason. And she does, we think, in the end of the book. And maybe it's not death, but it's transformation into something else. And that's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah. That's where we're starting to get into the ideas of, like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive? That, that then when you contrast with, like, the Rocinante went into a 4G bank and the torpedo passed underneath the point defense cannons. You're like,
Holden could feel it in his testicles.
Always.
How many times do we hear about Holden's testicles in this book?
Yeah, there are. I mean, like, it's funny. I mean, like, a book like this, like, really does sort of wash back and forth between these, like, great moments of, like, lyricism and structure, and then just some moments of real.
Like sort of Tom Clancy writing, it is great. It's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't quite made the connection you made about the first sentence, but I think you must be right that it's not simply a good opening sentence about a character whose desperation causes her to take a risk. It is a sort of statement of destiny, and Miller joins her. And if I were curious at all about the next fate, my only real curiosity is about the fate of Miller and Julie Mao. I'm not really curious about the proto-molecule. I'm not really curious about the alien civilization. I'm not really even curious about Holden and Naomi. He's a good dude. I wish them well. I hope Omar has a long life of, like, repairing Gauss round holes and going to brothels. I hope Alex never loses his Texas drawl. I hope his missiles always fly true, but I'm not that interested in where they end up. But I am interested in Julie Mao's fate. Yeah. And that's maybe the one thing that I would continue reading for.
Yeah, the moments when this book are about mortality of individuals and of wholesale species, I'm interested. Yeah. And then, the moments of daring do, I'm like, this is a nice distraction. But does it rise above turning the show on and watching an episode? No. But the show is very well done. It really captures this sense of daring do and adventure that you're talking of. And it's just sheer joy to get on the Rocinante and check it out. And everybody looks great. And but I
are the Belters, like, really, like, tall and skinny and angular, or do they sort of wave that away?
They wave it a little bit, but they do a nice job of keeping enough people in that particular kind of way. Like, we do have a few very tall actors that are in there. There's some really good scenes of Belters basically being tortured by just being, like, just left in a cell at 1G. And, like, that's you're like, that sucks, but that's a very clever way to draw that out.
That's right. At one point, Rocinante is going at a resting pace of a half G, and even that's a little bit much for the Belters. Yeah. But they can take it, but it's not really restful for them. And I thought that was interesting.
Should we go to trivia?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I think you're first.
Okay. So, as we talked about last time, much of the story of Leviathan Wakes comes from Ty Frank's RPG sessions. Yep. But the idea of the setting comes from even further back. Ty Frank has like an entrepreneurial background, and after he left that, he published a story, his very first piece of published writing, basically about his vision for the solar system. It wasn't these characters or anything like that, but this solar system of Belters and Mars and Earth, and we're not going to Tau Ceti. Like, that's not the science fiction. It's very difficult to live near Saturn.
We're not even going to Pluto,
right,
baby.
Yeah, exactly. So when he published that story, which of the following 4 science fiction literary magazines did it appear in? Was it 1, Asimov's science fiction, the classic, the great; 2, Analog Science Fiction and Fact, another one of the big ones; Orson Scott Card's Intergalactic Medicine Show; or D, Niven's Circular Stories?
Give me A and B again.
A is Asimov's science fiction, and then B is Analog Science Fiction and Fact. And
I think it's
a spoiler. I've only invented one of these, and it's the Niven option. So all 3 of these are real.
I believe it's B, Analog Science Fiction and Fact.
It was C, Orson Scott Card's Intergalactic Medicine Show. He took a 2-week writing workshop with Orson Scott Card, basically based on the strength of his sister read some of the stuff that he was creating. She took a crack at writing the story. He was like, yeah, this is interesting, but it's not my vision. And then he wrote the short story, and it somehow found its way into Orson Scott Card's hands. And Orson Scott Card is like, whoever wrote this should keep going. Yeah. And then Ty Frank reached out and was like, well, that was me. Can I come to your writing workshop?
There is a real Ender's Game like quality to just sort of like the volume of action and grappling with some big ideas, but also a lot of like gravity stuff and missile stuff and marine stuff.
Yeah,
sort of
discovering
in
that
the midst of all that.
You want to attack by floating down towards your enemy with your feet first, so you provide a lot of that stuff.
Yeah,
it's fun, but use sparingly. Yeah.
There does seem something very sui generis about Ender's Game that I'm curious if I went back to it, it would read as strongly as it did when I was 18 and read it for the first time. But okay, for you, similar sort of question. Okay, the name James S.A. Corey is derived from both writers. The pen name is Daniel's middle name, Ty's middle name, Daniel's daughter's initials, all combined together. And the goal when they created that name was to summon a particular effect, I'll just say. Was the effect to sound like a grouchy science fiction writer of the 70s who drank too much at conventions? A. B. To sound like the sort of fantasy writer with lots of initials who develops a language and world backstory to a degree completely unnecessary for the storytelling goals of the series. C. Was it to achieve an effect inspired by their mentor, George R.R. Martin, who once quipped, "You need at least 4 names to be successful in this business"? Or D. It is the name of the man hosting Louis Wu's birthday party at the beginning scene in Ringworld.
Oh my God, that would be so great.
These guys have read Niven.
Of course, yeah. I'm going to go with C because we do know that there is a George R.R. Martin connection. I'm going to go with that one.
Their mentor, George R.R. Martin, once quipped, "You need at least 4 names to be successful in this business." No. The goal was A, to sound like a grouchy science fiction writer of the 70s who drank too much at conventions, and to which Ty then adds, "We love those guys," which is pretty obvious.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. A double buzz episode.
Which reminds me of reading about Joe Haldeman and filk music at sci-fi conventions in the 1970s.
That's right. Filk music. I loved that. Oh, my God.
But I did give you. I do have a bonus. So this can redeem your buzz. Um, so Daniel Abraham gives the what explanation for the title Leviathan Wakes. A, it's a reference to Hobbes' Leviathan. B, it is a signal to the reader of the author's pretentiousness. Or C, it is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft and the demon creature Cthulhu, who was alternatively referred to as Leviathan in some Lovecraft stories.
Yeah. Oof. Boy. A and C are very attractive. C.
It is, in fact, B,
God damn it.
A signal of the readers of the author's pretentiousness. There's a quote somewhere from Daniel Abraham, which is like, yeah, we gave it that name because we wanted the readers to know that we are pretentious.
Oh, my God. Like,
which makes me just love these guys. So
fucking great.
I mean, I've been critical of this novel, but I love everything about the story of how it came to be. And I think, like, what a great world it can be where you can sit down and play some role-playing games with your friends and then turn that into a novel, get some advice from George R.R. Martin, and turn that into, a IP that allows you to live the writing life and make a good living and explore space.
Yeah. Gosh, well, okay. A rough night for trivia, but I'm feeling...
Yeah, but that's all right. You only get one buzz.
Yeah. So I've got a redirect about will we read this book again?
Okay.
You've tipped your hand a little bit already, but are you going to read the second book?
I don't think so. I don't think it hooked me. I'm just not that. I'm just this idea of it's just like the Andromeda strain meets like some Isaac Asimov novels. I don't know. It was well done, but I don't really care that much. And I could see lots of different directions that the proto molecule could go, but I don't know. Maybe that said, maybe I'll be at a beach house one day and it'll be on the shelf and I'll be like, what the hell? The first one was fun.
Yeah.
So who knows? But I'm leaning to no.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Yeah, I think this is hardcore beach reading by now for me too. So like the only context that I think I would read this book again is if I were at a beach and just wanted to relax and this was on the shelf and I was like, oh yeah, I'll take a trip through that nostalgia.
I mean, I would read the Foundation trilogy again first before reading this again or reading the next one. I would maybe go back to some of the source material first. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too mean. I do feel like this would be a really fun book if you had a rainy day at a library and you saw it at the the popular fiction shelf and you're just like, whatever. That would be fun. Yeah. Find a beanbag somewhere and read the next book and it would be great. So maybe I'll go back on my probably not. I do, as I said before, I'm very charmed by these fellows.
Yeah.
Like as writers, I like what they have done. I'm happy for them. But ultimately, I did not find it to be I did not find the premise to be so intriguing that I felt like I wanted to stay in the world.
Yeah, 100%. Well, everybody, next up, so we are leaving the worlds of relativistic noir, and we are headed to Ripley en film.
Wow.
And I'm so excited about this. And the first one that we are going to watch is Purple Noon, the 1960 French production directed by René Clément.
And we should say it's available to stream at Amazon Prime and Criterion for affordable rates. So you can find it. It's not that hard to find. Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes pilot the ship, target the weapons, and repair the reactor. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich.
Thanks so much, guys. And as a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Or you can enroll as a patron at the You Really, Really Like Us tier, which includes some one-on-one editorial time with one of us or the other or both, And if you just tell a friend about us, that really, really helps us spread the show.
Yeah, totally. All right. See you next time, everybody. Replay en film.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Purple Noon.